Welcome to Why You're Reading, the podcast that unpacks the hype behind everything from book talk obsessions to Booker Prize winners. Hello, Ellie.
Hello.
Are you excited?
I'm very excited. This is the episode I've wanted to do for so many weeks. So I'm very, very excited.
What are we talking about today, Ellie?
Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn, which is a passion of mine. I think it might even be part of my personality.
I think it was when you were over in Dublin and we were talking about like podcast topics and we were talking about Bridgerton and I was like, oh, do you like them? And you were like, yes. When the new season came out, I took a day off work and I was like, oh, right.
I took more than a day off work. I took like a whole, because it came out on a Thursday. So I took the whole Thursday, Friday.
Weekend.
Long weekend. It was the recovery time. It was the rewatching time. It was the travel time to my friends because she and I travel to each other's houses to watch part 1 and part 2. So it was delightful and joyous. Although I will not be doing that again because I am not waiting 5 hours after it launches to drive to my friend's house to watch it. I love my friend dearly, but no,
not that much.
It killed me.
You love Bridgerton more.
I did. It was the spoilers. I was so afraid of spoilers. But for this podcast, we're actually talking about the books as well as the TV series. And I have read all of the Bridgerton books. But for those of you that may not have read them or do not know about the Netflix series, where have you been living? But Bridgerton is set in Regency era London. And there are 8 books in the series. Each of the books follows a different Bridgerton sibling, of which there are 8, funnily enough, as they navigate kind of high society and family expectations and falling in love and getting married. And it all starts with the first book, which is The Duke and I, which follows Daphne, who is the eldest daughter of the Bridgerton siblings, even though she's actually the 4th child in the sibling tree. So there are quite a few Bridgertons and therefore quite a few stories, but I love each
also,
and every one of them.
they're named alphabetically.
They are, yeah. So it's
Is it,
Anthony...
wait, can I, wait, no,
Oh,
just
yes,
say,
okay.
can I guess, see how many
Yes.
I can get? Okay, so Anthony, Benedict, Colin,
Yep,
Daphne,
yep,
Eloise,
yes,
Francesca,
yep.
she's George?
Nope.
Gregory?
Yeah, Gregory.
Okay, that was a guess.
Oh, very well.
Hyacinth?
Hyacinth.
That, yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. I got 7 out of 8. Maybe this is a personal flaw of mine, but if you told me Regency era, I wouldn't know exactly where to put it, you know? So I know it's like the 1800s, pre-industrial kind of London. It's like, you know, we have our horse and carriages, Austen, like Jane Austen kind of era, period piece, right?
Yes, we do. I'm actually going to just double check when the Regency era began because I'm not entirely sure of the numbers. But officially, it's from 1811 to 1820. So it's actually a very short period of time. Basically, the Prince Regent was ruling during the time that King George was on the throne, but was mentally incapacitated. So that's the Regency era and why it's so named. It sort of encompasses, like you say, the Jane Austen era and that early 1800s just in general as well.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of a historical revisionism in the series and the TV show. I have seen the first season of Bridgerton, the Queen Charlotte spin-off. Then for this episode, I watched the first episode of season 2 and season 3, just to get a little taster. Because I've only seen the TV show, I'm curious to know like what the differences between the book and the TV show are, because I know that there's not the same kind of elements of like race and queerness and gender and stuff. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, definitely not. The first book came out in 2000. So it's been, there's 20 years between the first book coming out and the first TV show coming out. So there is a big difference. And the TV show, I love what they've done with it. The fact that it's kind of colourblind casting, the fact they've added queer storylines, which is great. They've made it relevant for a modern audience. So things like as well, using classical reinterpretations of popular pop songs has become a real signature of Bridgerton, which I love. And my Spotify
It'll be like
playlist,
Thank You Next, but
Thank
with
You Next.
violence. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And Madonna on violence, Material Girl is my go-to, to be honest. So it's a very exciting TV series in many, many ways. But yeah, they do definitely differ. The plot lines are still fairly similar, but for the sake of a TV show, they have to expand and add subplots and intrigue. So there are certain characters in the TV series like Eloise, who's one of my favourites in the show, but actually not one of my favourites in the books.
In the book, she's the one that she's quite like kind of independent and feminist, right? She's quite like not interested in the marriage courting aspect at all, right?
She's not interested in the marriage mart in terms of kind of women just basically being shopped around trying to look for a husband or entice a man to be interested in them. And that's the same in the books as it is in the TV series. But in the TV series, they've really kind of expanded that. They've made her very comedic and independent and the girl that all of us want to be, and we really root for her because she has our kind of modern sensibilities when it comes to marriage and love. Whereas in the books, she still has elements of that. She's definitely very independent and rebellious comparative to kind of Penelope, her best friend, and to her sisters in particular. But it's not as strong or as comedic as it is in the TV show. And there's no subplots with regards to her hunting down Lady Whistledown. So there's deviations, but I think the TV series just makes it better rather than takes away or is unfaithful to the book series, in my opinion.
I think we should say as well there will be spoilers for some of Bridgerton. Like, I think we'll be discussing like who Lady Whistledown is, the queer elements of it, the racial elements and stuff. I'm wondering how kind of much of a straightforward historical romance Julia Quinn's novels are, you know, in the kind of canon of historical romance literature, because I think the Bridgerton TV series is set apart from a lot of period pieces. So that's why I'm curious to know the differences. And like, also when we're talking about the differences, I'd like your kind of opinions on why you think certain things were changed, you know?
The books really are quite comedic, and that's why I think I particularly like them, because they're so easy and fun and witty and just kind of sweet. And there's a lot of one-liners and kind of descriptions that are just really good. And some of them have made their way into the TV show, and some from the TV show have just entered the canon of what people think happens. So in the TV show, there's a brilliant moment in episode 1 where Eloise screams up the staircase, "Daphne, you must make haste. Did you think she heard me?" Which is the best opening to any character I've ever seen. And that happens within the first 2 minutes. It is hilarious and so true to her. But there are moments in the books like that are very similar. Not that one precisely, but things like Lady Whistledown, who is this kind of gossip writer. And every single chapter opens with a very barbarous letter full of gossip. And it's very witty, very clever, with lots of one-liners. And that kind of happens in the TV show, but in the book, that's every chapter. There's something. And then there's lots of one-liners and things.
So are they written from first-person perspective or third-person perspective?
I actually can't remember off the top of my head. It is third-person perspective.
Okay, yeah.
We are reading it from the perspective of someone saying, Daphne said this.
Is the kind of tone as if it's narrated by Lady Whistledown, or is it just kind of an objective?
It's a bit of both, I'd say. So because every chapter starts with a Lady Whistledown letter, you kind of get the sense you're being told the story from a Lady Whistledown perspective, I suppose, but not in the same kind of, it's not mean, it's just neutral and very nuanced, whereas the opening letters are much more pointed, shall we say. There's a lot of attitude to them, but there's a lot of comedy in the books. I think the best thing about the comedy actually in the books, which has translated to the TV show, is the family dynamic. Because it's 8 siblings and their mother, who's been widowed, the dowager lady of the house, they have this lovely family relationship which comes with all the banter, which is just charming and sweet. And things like there's a scene where Violet is standing with her daughter Daphne and all of her older brothers, and Daphne's kind of very uncomfortable because she's got this very handsome man next to her who she wants to talk to. And Violet just kind of turns to her daughter and says, "Do you want your brothers here?" And she's like, "No, I don't." And she just turns to her oldest son and goes, "Go away." Like, what are you doing? And it's very kind of typical mum behaviour and brotherly behaviour, the kind of the 3 muscly men trying to stop their sister from falling in love. And it's just very sweet, but very familiar as well. So I think that's why I love it, because I come from a huge family. So I recognise all of these antics and the pranks that are played and the kind of continuing banter throughout a book and a storyline. So you mentioned you've seen the Queen Charlotte TV series?
Yes.
So I've seen the Queen Charlotte TV series, but I haven't read the book, which was an adaptation of the TV series. So unlike the other Bridgerton books, which came out in the early 2000s, and then the show happened, they added in Queen Charlotte because she's not in the books at all.
I was surprised by how invested I got in it. I don't know if it was my state of mind. I don't know what it was. Like, I wish that we had seen the characters happy for like more than 10 minutes, because it's basically, you know, Mad King and King George the Third and his marriage to Queen Charlotte. And, you know, when they get married, they fall in love, but then he's like hiding his kind of mental state from her. Yeah, I found it actually quite moving and sad.
Yeah, it is based on the true facts of, you know, Queen Charlotte and King George clearly must have liked each other a bit, because they had 15 children. Which my favourite quote in that whole TV series though is when Queen Charlotte walks in and she's got her daughters on her left and her sons on the right, and they famously had over 50 children, but all of them were illegitimate. She looks at her children in the TV series and goes, you know, virgins to the left of me, whores to the right. And it was so, I could hear the song in my head that's the tune to as well, and it was brilliant. I love that scene. I love the adaptation, but it is miserable in places. It's really heartbreaking, but it is based on their reality that even though they really must have liked each other, they were kind of separated, and he was really tortured. It was awful.
I didn't realize until I think we started talking about Bridgerton that the racial elements of Bridgerton were like a product of Shonda Rhimes' involvement. Shonda Rhimes is the producer behind Grey's Anatomy and Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. Her productions follow this colorblind casting approach, which especially in the 2010s was quite radical, where it was the actor and the character's race was not specified in the writing. Anyone could be anyone, widening the kind of representation. But in Bridgerton, I think the race elements are quite interesting. In the first season, I think this is what turned me off, and I was like, this is crazy, where it's kind of implied, I think it may, and slightly in the Queen Charlotte spin-off as well, that like King George, the white man, married Queen Charlotte, who's, I think race has been debated among historians. She might have been mixed race, she might have been white, we're not sure. But Bridgerton rolls with the kind of idea that she was mixed race. Through their marriage, racism is conquered. And I remember there's a line in the first season that's like, love conquers all. It's like, interesting. Yeah, okay. Because I think I went into it thinking it was another one of the colorblind castings. Like anyone can be anyone in this universe. But then when they actually addressed the racism, I was like, oh, so racism is real in this? And oh, interesting. I don't think I'm alone from reading other kind of articles and criticisms of the show that I would have preferred if it were just kind of this like alternate fantasy colorblind world instead of trying to address the racism, because I think I'd rather just it be fantasy than this kind of flippant kind of bandage over this era of history. You know what I mean? Before the Netflix series, were the books popular?
They were popular within the genre. They weren't kind of big bestsellers. People didn't know about them. If you weren't a reader of historical romance, if you weren't a voracious reader of historical romance, you probably wouldn't have been aware of the series. A lot of the historical romances are very sexy, but it's not a sexy genre in the sense that it's not one that's often been pushed as like a mainstream big budget campaigns for publishers. And in the early 2000s as well, there wasn't social media. So you're looking at kind of book clubs and libraries, and in the likes of Mills and Boon, you're looking at things like postal orders as well, which they still do to this day, but was still very popular in the early 2000s. So it wasn't a kind of everyone was talking about it online, there was a load of buzz, but it was still moderately successful, and certainly within the genre people were aware of Julia Quinn. I mean, there are 8 books in the Bridgerton series, but actually she's written over 40 novels and novellas and short story collections, and a lot of them are set within the Bridgerton universe. So I have read of her entirety 16 of her books so far, with more to come. So yeah, she's
Is she still publishing?
Author. She is still publishing. So she wrote Queen Charlotte, and she's done a graphic novel of a book that's passed around the characters. So, and actually she's done something very meta and brought a book that's referenced by the characters a lot and turned it into a real graphic novel, which is quite fun. So she's in that kind of experimental stage, but she hasn't written anything entirely new for a little while. But why would she need to right now?
Given that like they were popular but not that popular, and they're kind of from the early 2000s, how do you think that they got turned into a Netflix TV show?
I was really surprised when I find this out, because I'd never heard of Julia Quinn. I'd never read any kind of Regency romances before the TV series came out, and then I read all of the Bridgerton books within the first 8 weeks of 2021. I, like I said, became obsessed. But I went back and had a look, because they released a book called The Making of Bridgerton in 2022 as a result of its popularity. And Shonda Rhimes explained how she came across it, because in 2017, she wasn't very well. She was in London. She was staying at a hotel. And obviously when you're miserable and have the flu and can't do anything, but you just need a distraction, she just grabbed a book off the bookshelf, and it happened to be The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. And she fell head over heels. She'd never read romances. She's famous for doing like these crime and thrillers and very intense dramas, which are excellent. And then she sent it off to her producing partner, who's Betsy Beers, I believe her name is, and said, read this romance. And Betsy was like, are you still ill? Like, are you okay? But she read it, also loved it. And then from there, it sort of spiraled. And then the story goes that Julia Quinn, the author, was sat in Starbucks and got a phone call from Shonda Rhimes saying, could we please produce your books? It is the 1 in a billion author experience that we all wish, as an author, I certainly wish for it to happen. A producer, a director, a famous actor, someone picks up your book, loves it, and says, can I turn it into a huge phenomenon Netflix series?
It is such a dream scenario.
Completely. And apparently it was really quick.
I saw in a behind the scenes thing that it was I think in the 2021 they gave a tour of the Bridgerton warehouse, and they had like 7,500 bespoke costumes.
Yep.
Like thousands. Like the amount of money that is in this production must be insane. And but it's paying off. Yeah.
It's paying off. They've just invested more for the next season. They've just built a bespoke Bridgerton set because they were using kind of different sets and traveling to different, I can't remember what they're called, like warehouses where they have other people's sets and fronts on and such. But they've just built an actual Bridgerton street, and they took a load of press round, and this was all revealed around Valentine's Day as well. And they've really invested in it. So it's like Harry Potter world, but Bridgerton. And if they turn it into Bridgerton world, I will be there so fast.
There's been the whole Regency core aesthetic as well spun off from this, of like an interest in corsets and, you know, the period dresses, even though the Bridgerton period piece is not historically accurate. And I think what's interesting from seeing the first season way back when in 2020 and then dipping into season 2 and 3 and watching Queen Charlotte is how they initially maybe started being a little bit more historically accurate with the sideburns and the hair and everything, and, you know, the very natural makeup. And then you go into season 3 and Nicola Coughlan has like a blowout and full glam, and it's like, oh. And, you know, they had the elements of the kind of anachronisms or like historical inaccuracies with the like Ariana Grande violin covers and stuff, but it's interesting to see how they kind of fully leaned into the camp as the seasons went on, and I think it endears me a bit more to the series.
Because I'm kind of the opposite. I would like season 2 aesthetic back, if I'm honest. Season 1 was very, like you say, they were trying to be slightly more historically accurate with regards to kind of the hairdos and the sideburns, which kind of are the hair that goes down to the men's jawlines, and it looks just so weird, and the bouffant hair, which
they managed to make like Jonathan Bailey look kind of unattractive, which is a feat in itself.
Precisely. And then like for season 2 he had his glow up. I was like, all he did is have his natural hair. And that was instead of wearing a wig and sideburns. But season 2 for me was better because I think season 3 I kept getting distracted by like Penelope's acrylic nails.
Like period pieces are nothing new, obviously, but I feel like this kind of is like a refresh of the period piece. I think The Guardian called it initially the Netflix's response to Downton Abbey, but I think it kind of reminds me of the Sofia Coppola film Marie Antoinette with Kirsten Dunst, which is about Marie Antoinette, but it's a very like stylized, you know, kind of campy, this kind of pastel take on that like period. And I feel like this is similar. I was thinking of it like it's kind of like Gossip Girl for the Regency era. You know, like Gossip Girl meets Jane Austen is how I'd imagine this show, or how I'd pitch it. As well as refreshing the period piece aesthetics, we also kind of, like we alluded to earlier, refreshes / repaints maybe the dynamics, the social dynamics of the time, you know, with race, queerness, and gender. And I'm curious as well with the books how this differs. Are the queer elements present in the novels, or is that a new inclusion as well?
It's an entirely new inclusion. The books are not LGBT focused in the slightest. They are all very heteronormative romances, very traditional historical romance, I'd say. Very similar for that time period in terms of what everything else was being produced. But had they been written now, I think all of the subplots, the LGBT elements and such, we would be seeing them in the books as they stand. But back in 2000 to 2008, it wasn't part of the zeitgeist yet. It wasn't part of the conversation even. So...
Yeah, and I know with the kind of gender dynamics as well, the importance of kind of like literature for the women, and like Eloise being very kind of driven, and like we were talking about earlier, you know, she has her own desires, her own passions, her own goals outside of marriage, which is very much not of the time. And then, you know, Lady Whistledown and the character behind her is also kind of, you know, this business woman.
There are elements where it is and it isn't of the time, because things like Mary Wollstonecraft had written the vindication of the rights of women in the 1700s. So there were elements of kind of early feminism, early women's liberation coming through into the Regency period, but it was still very much of a time where you answered to your husband or to your father or to your brother, and you did not have your own agency yet. So Eloise is still rebellious, and I think given that her household is run by her mother, who's a widower, and she does have the older brother relationships, but the older brothers in the Bridgerton books are very relaxed around their siblings, particularly in the Bridgerton household. So I think her rebellious nature in the books actually feels suitable for the time, and there is suggestion and references, I think, to her reading things like Jane Austen in the TV series, but also Mary Wollstonecraft and pamphlets and things like that as well. So there would have been an option.
No, you're definitely right. I think I meant like the kind of like societal expectations. The first season got criticism for this. It was basically like a marital rape done like by a woman to her husband. And I remember watching that, and I know that they altered elements from the book, but I think in the TV show, it kind of, they didn't frame it as a sexual assault. You know, they didn't really deal with it at all. It was kind of like, you know, she did that and then she got what she wanted. And also because they added in the race elements, it was a white woman raping a black man, which complicates it even further. And then after that, it was kind of very much dropped. It was just like, oh, it was for a plot point, and then nothing came of it. It wasn't an exploration of the power dynamic. It wasn't, you know, the man's trauma was not explored at all. It was very much just kind of brushed over, and it's never mentioned again, really.
Yeah, and there's that all is forgiven, because I think there's an element, and again, this isn't justifying in the slightest, but there's an element of, you stopped me getting something without communicating, without telling me why, and lying is the kind of wife's perspective. And then from his perspective, he kind of realizes, actually, you're right, I did something wrong here. But therefore, they just don't talk about the marital rape, like you say, in between, because he's almost like, you were right in the first place. I should have just gone ahead, and I shouldn't have pulled out, basically, is what's happening. And it's an interesting dynamic, and like you say, they do brush over it, but it's so complicated. But maybe one scene where they just talk about it and just
or if they just like
forgiveness.
Didn't include it, because I think if you were going to alter it and kind of, you know, I don't know, strip the plot point down to its bare bones, I don't know, I think you can't really do that without doing your due diligence. And I think that that's kind of, like we talked about earlier with the racial dynamics as well, kind of an issue that I have with the show, of just pretending that this one marriage solved racism, and that, you know, even though the black characters typically are still kind of like struggling for their place in society, you know, in the start of the series, it kind of brushes over the fact that, like, at this time in history, there are like 1.5 million people stolen from Africa and the slave trade. It's the height of the slave trade, and, you know, colonialism is rife. And I'm actually intrigued, do they address it at all in the second season? Because the second season is a romance between what's his name?
It's Anthony Bridgerton, and then in the show it's Kate Sharma. In the book, it's
Indian.
Kate Sheffield. Yeah.
Okay. In the TV show, she's from India, and she is Indian. But do they address over the course of season 2 the India-British dynamics at all, of the colonialism?
They don't even mention it at all, to be honest. She's always talking about India as being this lovely, wonderful place that she misses, and they go back in season 3, but there's never any mention of the kind of the colonial disparities and disputes that were going on at that time. There's none at all.
I think that's interesting, because I feel like maybe if in the first season they didn't try to address racism, then in that second season, kind of that works, that makes sense. Whereas in the first season, when they kind of set up this social commentary and then just kind of drop it, it becomes a little bit confusing. And I think because so much of the appeal of this show, and, you know, the part of the like pandemic success, is the escapism, you know, it's this alternative reality, it's lush, it's gorgeous, look at all these people in these beautiful gowns in these beautiful places. Then when you start trying to like drag in real life issues and address them poorly, I think it takes away from the escapist fantasy, for me anyways. The kind of majority of the criticism that I've seen and heard around Bridgerton is with that.
Without putting words into Shonda Rhimes' mouth, because I don't know actually what the opinion was, apart from the fact she wanted to make the show colourblind and such, I think there's an element of her maybe trying to keep true to the books in terms of, these are romances, these are happily ever afters, but just making sure the cast and the storylines to an extent reflect a wider variety of people. It's not just white people falling in love with white people, as we've seen for the last 100 years, ever since the TV and film were invented, or we started seeing on our screens. I don't want to give any spoilers about any of the other future love interests for anyone that hasn't read the books, but there are some characters we may have already met who may be love interests. And you should have seen my reaction at the end of season 3. My friend had to pause. I was crying. That's all I'm going to say on that matter. An introduction to a character, and I couldn't speak.
Oh,
so
that's really cute.
I was very excited.
I wonder, because I think when I was reading about the queer storylines as well, I was reading a Guardian article, and it caught my eye because the title was just like, "We don't want lesbians," and I was like, "What is this?" And it was talking about how in season 3, I think there is an introduction of lesbian couple. Is it Francesca and Michaela potentially, or it's hinted at? There's like a polarized reception online between the gay couple, Benedict and his love interest, and Francesca and her love interest. And it seemed that part of it, I think, is Francesca's love interest is mixed race or black. And I think part of it was colored by that as well. I think it's interesting how the kind of, even though the show makes a point of departing from the novels in a lot of ways. I know, kind of keeping the through storyline and the characters. Sometimes people will kind of use the book purist argument against things that they don't like. And I think when the first season came out as well, I think the Telegraph described it as, pandering to the woke media, Yeah.
The thing is, Julia Quinn is very involved in the TV series. So she has sign-off and is involved in all these plot lines. And so the purism argument almost dies with that, because she's like, the author has said, this is great. This is not even okay. This is great. This is what I want from the show. Yeah. And also we live in a different time and things have evolved. And these relationships do exist. There's no, we're not erasing lesbianism or polyamorous relationships. My favourite thing about Bridgerton, and probably one of the reasons why I love the show as well as the book so much, is the fact that we explore so much in terms of relationships. As a demisexual woman, I really appreciate seeing other sexualities, relationships, age differences and such explored. So the polyamorous love interests, which is Benedict and a queer lovely relationship, was great. We've got the plot twist of Michaela, which is the one that I was completely shocked about at the end. And I don't
is that it? Okay, yeah. Can I interrupt you? Isn't there a bit in Bridgerton where they talk about, like, you need to be gardened?
Yes.
Or something? Yes, because my friend and I said that all the time. Then for the next 3 months we kept talking about, like, oh, I need to be gardened.
My garden is in bloom.
My garden is in bloom. My garden is quite dry and desperate. It's like, right. It was just so funny. Yeah.
They wrote that so well because it's relatable. It's so clever. It's metaphorical, and it really works with the Bridgerton aesthetic as well in terms of gardening and bees and butterflies and things like that. I love the fact they are openly discussing older women. I mean, yes, she's a widow, but older women in general, Lady Danbury as well, exploring their own sexuality and desires. And in a way that's very like women today in terms of, doesn't matter how old you are, getting together with your girls, talking about how you need to be gardened. And I love that. I love the representation that offers. And it's a brilliant piece of comedy as well. So all in all, I just love the representation of all the sexualities, all the relationships, the ageism, and the lack of ageism even, and I really just don't want any erasure.
You alluded to this with the it's not quite family friendly, that I think people also talk about how it's a period piece but it's like sexy, they fuck.
They do.
Because I think in the past 5 years we've seen a boom in that kind of the romantasy, autoerotica, Bridgerton, kind of discussion of sex scenes and women's pleasure in particular. A lot of media centering women's pleasure that are also often written or produced by women. Like, obviously, there's been sex and romance books for however long romance books have existed, but we're having more open conversations about the presence of sex, and we're including it in more media, and again, centering women. Is there a lot of sex in the books?
Yes, there is. Okay. There's not. It's all within kind of the marriage realm. It is still very much in the Regency era. So you see, once the characters get married to their loved ones, their partners, and such, there tends to be a large honeymoon period, shall we say, of self-discovery. There are also occasions there is a bit of sex before marriage for certain relationships, but the majority of it happens either just before the wedding, just before they get engaged and have a very rushed wedding, or straight thereafter, and then also at the end and such. So there's lots of moments throughout the book, and within the genre, within historical, Regency or otherwise, there tends to be a lot of sex, and not necessarily, it could be spice, it could be smutty, it could be romantic. There's lots of different versions of it, but it certainly does scratch an itch, and it gardens a garden in terms of the amount in it. The one thing I'd say, having read the books and read them in quick succession, was the sex scenes in Bridgerton do become quite samey, and it turns out these siblings share a lot of similarities when it comes to, in terms of just what they like.
Interesting.
They all have the same. Again, like Emily Henry, there was that when we read Emily Henry, there's a scene where she kept mentioning about her nipples peaked or something.
Yes,
and
her
in this one,
pinched or something.
Pinched. That was it. Her nipples pinched. Yes. In Bridgerton, there is a fascination with nipples. That's all I'm going to say. But it's just a case of, I've never read so many descriptions. And it's just, is that the only erogenous zone you're aware of? Find more. Stop talking to one another and talk to other people outside of the family. Stop getting your tips from your brothers.
Or your tits. Like, speaking of Emily Henry as well, I feel like, with this, there's the same kind of appeal of the tropes. We have, fake dating, marriage of convenience, love triangles, enemies to lovers. Do you think the Bridgerton hype is here to stay? I know, outside of yourself. Outside of myself,
I think I could fuel it. No, I think it is here to stay. I don't know if they'll do 8 seasons. just because they've started bringing other character storylines into. So instead of just doing like, okay, this season is about this sibling, this season is about that sibling. In season 3, we also had Francesca get married, in addition to Colin getting married. And Francesca's storyline, that's only the beginning, because in the books, she does get married off page. And then when we get to her book, we learn more about what happens to her next. And again, I don't want to give spoilers, but we are starting to see kind of characters coming in that are going to be featured later, perhaps, if they go down the route of the books and not rewrite the stories, which happened in season 1 and again in season 3. So there's a lot of ways that they could shorten a TV series. Instead of having to do 8, they could maybe do 6. Obviously, I'd love as many as they possibly can. And there's also tons of other books that they could bring in. They haven't really brought in any of the characters. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But I want this to carry on as long as they possibly can. Give me all the spin-offs. Turn this into the Marvel universe, like the equivalent of for Bridgerton, please. I will be there.
I feel like I don't even have to ask you this question, but we've reached the point where I want to ask you, with the Bridgerton series, are you going to shelf it, share it, or shred it?
I'm just going to show my book collection, which
is
is
a fat stack. Oh my god!
Yeah, just whilst I answer this question for those
8,
who can't
9?
see, there's
they're
9
out of
books
frame.
here.
There's so many of them.
Yes, there's out of frame. I have 9 because I have the 8 books in the Bridgerton series, and then I have the epilogues as well, which is a spin-off book. I think I might shelve these. I may or may not already have a dedicated Bridgerton
You're
shelf.
gripping them quite tightly.
Don't touch them. Don't come for them. In a fire, I save these and my cat, and that's it. What about you? Are you going to... Actually, you can't save it. You can't do this because you haven't got the books. So instead, I'm going to ask you, will you play it or will you pause it when it comes to the TV show?
Interesting. I think when I revisited it, watching the first episode of season 2, I was like, oh, interesting. I think it actually has intrigued me quite a bit. Even though I know what happens, I was like, oh, like this is actually fun, and I'm not kind of on the edge of my seat dying to see what happens, but I feel like it could be something where I'll like throw it on the TV and watch it, or like see if any friends want to watch it.
So basically you're just angling for an invitation to come to mine.
Yeah,
season
just
4.
like if anyone wanted to watch it, if anyone was free.
I'm telling you now, if you come around mine, 1, taking the day off, 2, you will need to dress up as your favourite character, and if you don't, I have costumes, and 3, there will be hand fans. Simple as. They're needed. They're required.
A hand fan. I'm there.
Hand fan. A hand fan. You need it.
Well, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Why You're Reading. And should I say this season of Why You're Reading? Because this is actually a wrap on our first season of Why You're Reading. This has been our 10 episodes, and we're taking a little pause for the podcast, but we'll be active on our socials.
Definitely. We're still going to be very active on our socials, on Instagram and TikTok at Why You're Reading. So do stay in touch with us and let us know in the comments what books you think we should read next.
And we will be keeping you updated with our antics in the meantime. Ellie has a very exciting few months ahead of her, don't you?
Yeah, I'm off on book tour for my book. I'm going to be travelling the US and the UK, shouting about my books for once, but I will have plenty of downtime for reading. So I'm looking forward to discussing with you, Ellen, what books we're going to read next, and we look forward to returning very soon. So goodbye for now.
Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you in our next season. Bye.
Bye.